and end the chronic disease epidemic that is destroying our children. And that is an existential threat to our nation. When my uncle was president and I was a 10-year-old boy, the rate of chronic disease in this country was 6%. Today, it's 60%. When my uncle was president, we spent zero on chronic disease in this country. There were no drugs to treat it. Today, we spend $4.3 trillion. $4.3 trillion. That's 5 times our military budget. It's the largest cost to our nation, and it is bankrupting us. And it is destroying us morally, because we are betraying our children by letting these industries poison them. The rate of obesity at that time was 3%. Today, it's 50% in our children. And 74% of Americans are obese or overweight. Well, we didn't suddenly become lazy and gluttonous. We are being mass poisoned by corrupt industry. In Japan, where they don't have this kind of corruption, the obesity rate is 3%. That's what it's supposed to be, 3%. It's not supposed to be 50%. And this is a national security threat. 77% of American kids are no longer qualified for military service because of chronic disease diagnoses. And what are these diseases? They're obesity, they're neurodevelopmental disorders, and I'm going to list some of them because I'm a 70-year-old man. And when I was a boy, I never heard of any of these diseases because nobody had them. You know, I had 11 siblings. I had about 70 first cousins. And I didn't know anybody with ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, sleep disorders, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, or autism. The autism rate in my generation today in 70-year-old men is 1 in 10,000. The autism rate in our children is 1 in 34. In California, as Callie just said, it's 1 in 24. And the rate in boys is much higher. We also saw this explosion of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease and lupus and juvenile diabetes, all of these exotic diseases that we never heard of as a kid. The diabetes rate when I was a kid was effectively 0. A typical pediatrician, when I was a young boy, would see 1 case of diabetes in his lifetime, in his career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 children who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And nobody's talking about it. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody is recognizing that we are being mass poisoned by big pharma and big food. And all these allergic diseases that suddenly appeared. I never knew a kid anywhere in any of the schools that I went to that had a peanut allergy or food allergies or eczema. My brother had asthma, and he was told by his doctor there will never be a cure for asthma because it's so rare that nobody will ever study it. Today, 1 out of every 8 black children in America's cities has asthma. What is happening to our children? And I saw this happening, and I began writing about it, and the media rose up and silenced me in 2005. And nobody would talk about it. The doctors wouldn't talk about it. The pediatricians wouldn't talk about it. The scientists, the government officials. And people warned me, if you keep talking about this, you're going to destroy your career. And I was stunned by this. And for 19 years, since 2005, I spend 30 minutes praying every day when I get out of bed. And my prayer is this. I ask God for 19 years to put me in a position where I could end the chronic disease epidemic and bring health back to our children. And in August, God sent me Donald Trump. Now, we're 5 days out from an election, and it's an election that we are certain to win. If every vote is counted, if all the votes are counted, we're going to win this election. Oh, now, the medical industrial complex. And I want to remind you of this. I've been told to go on a little longer because President Trump is not yet in the building. You know, I was going to tell you this. When I was 7 years old, I went to the inauguration of my uncle as president in Washington, D.C. And 3 days before that, President Eisenhower, the outgoing president, made what today we have to regard as the most important speech in American history. And it was the speech where he told Americans that they should be in fear of the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would erode our democracy, that would subvert our democratic institutions, that would steal our money and steal our resources and bankrupt the middle class in this country and make us weak in the long run. And I urge you to go look at that speech, because after he talks about the military-industrial complex, he says, and by the way, just as bad is the medical-industrial complex, which will pervert science, which will lie to the public, which will turn science to serve industrial and corporate interests, the mercantile ambitions of big corporations. Oh. Oh. As soon as Donald Trump started talking about giving me the power, he asked me to do three things. He asked me to root out the corruption. And end the conflicts of interest in our regulatory agencies. And end this corporate capture that has turned our regulatory agencies into sock puppets of the industries they're supposed to regulate. And he asked me to restore the tradition of gold standard, empirically based, evidence-based science and medicine in our regulatory agencies. And to restore the transparency so that these agencies must stop hiding science from us when it clashes with the commercial ambitions of the pharmaceutical industry. And he doesn't want me to take vaccines away from people. If you want to take a vaccine, you ought to be able to take it. We believe in free choice in this country. Oh, you ought to know the risks and benefits of everything you take. And we need good science for that. And we need informed consent. And he asked me to do that, and then he asked me to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. And he said, I want to see results, measurable results, in the diminishment of chronic disease within 2 years. And I said, Mr. President, I will do that. This has caused a lot of aggravation and apoplexy among a certain class of the medical elites. And today, the Washington Post and NBC and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal all did articles talking about what a catastrophe it's going to be if I get anywhere near the medical establishment. And I read the articles because I wanted to see the names of the people who were denouncing me. And every one of them is on the pharma payroll. These are what the media calls experts. But these are the same experts that made us the sickest country in the history of the world. Whatever they're doing is not working. We had during this country, these are the guys who gave us the COVID countermeasures, which shut down our schools, which closed our churches, which shut down 3.3 million businesses in this country. All the little businesses, and they left open the Walmarts and Facebook and all of the big people who were cashing in on the pandemic. And these are the people who are treating disease. For them, for these people, the most valuable asset in America is a sick child. They don't want your child dead, they want him sick for life. Then he's dependent on their products. And the more statins they prescribe for heart disease, the more heart disease goes up. The more metformin they prescribe for diabetes, the more diabetes we have. The more antidepressants they prescribe, the more people we have who are depressed. The more Ambien they prescribe, the more insomnia there is. The more opioids they prescribe, the more pain there is. The more Viagra they prescribe, the higher ED goes. And so these drugs, their formula, this pharmaceutical paradigm, is not working. And President Trump wants to do something different. And somebody called me one of the anchors of ABC today, and I had an off-the-record discussion with him. And he said, there's so much division in this country. And I said, that's because you're causing it. My nephew, who's traveled with me for 19 months, he's my wife Cheryl's nephew, and he's been working for me for 19 months and traveled everywhere with me, and he's met President Trump many times now. And he said to me today, he said, everybody who's met President Trump loves President Trump. He said, you can't help but love him. So why does half of America hate him? They haven't met him, and the media is telling them to hate him. And I said this, I said, you're demonizing him, you're vilifying him, you're calling us garbage, you're calling him Hitler, you're calling him a fascist, and of course people are going to hate him. And I said, and by the way, you're writing all these articles condemning me coming into Washington, dismantling the pharmaceutical paradigm. Where are you getting your salary? From pharma.